Welcome everyone to Rebel Impact for another video where we talk tactically about Star Wars Destiny. I'm your host, Rebel Gray, and today we're going to talk about the legendaries from the brand spanking new Way of the Force set, and I'm going to give you my opinion on how good I think they are. So yes, I'm going to be talking about these cards in tiers as the title of this video suggests, but I'm not going to be using a numerical tier list like 0, 1, or 2. Because I feel like that can almost be too abstract. And I'm going to use another sort of abstract scale. Now, I used to play a lot of Guilty Gear back in my day, so I'm going to be using the Japanese-style fighting game tier list instead, which goes from tier C, which is the worst, to S tier, which is the best. All right, so let's get going on these thoughts right after the break. Alright, so let's start by talking about C-tier cards, and the way I'm defining these is that these are cards that are probably not competitive at all, but people will try to put them in decks to make them work. Stuff like Rebellion Leader from last set is C-tier, for example. You might even say Grand Moff, things like that. So the first one up here is Formidable. Now, in my thoughts, Formidable is a pretty good control piece. It's a good upgrade for a control deck. I like the die, you know, that melee, the 2 shield sides is pretty good for villain. 2 specials, also really nice. And it gets to move equipment or weapon around, right? Almost like cargo hold gets to do that. And that's really neat, okay? Because essentially it can remove a die from the pool and also throw a upgrade that doesn't have redeploy somewhere else if you're playing some kind of control aggro mix. But that's just the thing, right? Ultimately, where does this card go, right? I feel like it might be a card that we see blossom later, but I have some really serious doubts that it's ever going to be a game changer. So for me, it's kind of like a cheap, maybe $5 legendary, something like that. I think that's probably the price it's going for, because people are looking at this card the same way and saying like, well, what do we do with it, right? We're really not that sure. The next card up is Stealthy, and Stealthy is kind of like, I guess, a yellow force meditation that requires another die to be in the pool. It has that. Its die also has built-in supports for the Jedi Partisans because it has a 2 indirect on it. In fact, the die itself is pretty decent all around, and you can see that these cards are sort of designed side by side, right? They're both upgrade abilities, 2 cost, hero, villain. They're both legendaries. They have a similar die in a sense. It's easy to see where they were kind of going with this. I also like that the special doesn't actually eat a die that's out, and it can be it has to be one of your character dice, which is a very important thing, right? So it's vulnerable, just like Force Meditation in terms of removal, and it's even doubly so because it's not just its own die, but it relies on another die being in the pool. So this could be good, but it's probably on the outskirts as far as mill cards go. But I'm going to be giving it a shot. I'm going to be trying this out, seeing if it works, and maybe like a Cassian Partisan mill deck, something like that. That has 4 character dice. It's really difficult to remove all of them, and a lot of those dice have a 2 value on them, right? There's a 2 value on at least each one of those dice. So, hey, it could have a spot, but I'm not really sure. The last one up here is General Grievous's Wheel Bike. Now, there are people who are saying that this card is really, really good. I don't know what they see in it. I think the die itself is okay, and it has really good synergy with General Grievous, but outside of that, I feel like it's probably a really bad slot in a deck. It costs 3. It's a vehicle, which is, I guess that's cool, but it also has a modified side on it, which is not really cool for a vehicle, and especially because only 2 of these sides can actually be resolved by themselves. The 3 melee, again, it works really well alongside Grievous. It's cool thematic stuff, but another card, it probably would be better in your deck, and I feel like this is one of those things that's just ultimately it's going to be trade fodder just to help people fill their sets because maybe they didn't pull this legendary and they just want to trade for it. Again, it's probably going to be another cheap legendary because General Grievous himself, even, who we're going to talk about in a little bit, you know, he's also, I don't know, he doesn't seem like he has a really great deck to him. And that's all the cards that I think are C-tier legendaries. All right, cards in the B tier are the types of cards that anchor tier 2 decks in our meta, and we might see a few of these early on being competitive or attempting to be competitive, but I think ultimately they're going to be on the outside looking in as we head into set 6 this fall, because people are going to learn how to play around these cards, or they're just they just kind of don't have great decks that they sort of fit in the long run. And the first one is who I mentioned just a few moments ago, which is General Grievous. Now, General Grievous is a beast, okay? I think that he's the General Grievous that we've always wanted, and now we have him, and this is what we got, and he's 20 points, and he's the full package that you have been looking for, and he has a lot of thematic cards in this set to support him, like the wheel bike, but there's also a couple of events that work really well for him too, that make him super powerful. Now, it remains to be seen if putting all your eggs into this 13 hit point basket is going to be worthwhile. His pairings also, they remain very restricted because of his point cost. Most people probably feel like he's going to want blue at his side for additional weapons. So if you can find someone that works well with him, then maybe Grievous is better than B tier. It's cards like, I don't know, Royal Guard doesn't seem that terrible to keep him alive a little longer. Also brings blue. Single die Anakin, maybe that works. Talzin would bring some consistency, but at 1 die, I'm not sure that she's that stellar. And of course, there's always Night Sister, right? And, you know, if you're playing Night Sister, you could run a 2-point plot. Something like Stolen Intel might be good for him to draw that extra weapon early on. I don't know. General Grievous just seems like he's a super badass card on paper. He can ignore all those play restrictions. He's got that amazing power action. I just don't know that he gets away. He's able to wiggle around without a really good elite pairing. Like Bazine just isn't good enough for him. So let's see what people do with him and if he can push the top of this tier or move into the next tier of decks. Next up is Rex, and I like Rex all around. I think he's going to single-handedly make Red Hero see play again as far as aggro decks go. Now, his battlefield stealing ability, that's really annoying for some decks, especially those Arinda price decks, and it's really good for him alongside Clone Troopers. But I don't think that he's the savior that heroes are looking for. In fact, I don't really think they need one because heroes are doing pretty great this set, and they have been doing this well all year in general. But his die is really good. His activated ability is really good. His points to HP ratio is really, really good. He deserves to be a legendary. I just don't think he's going to be, you know, in a tier 1, tier 0 kind of deck. Now, last up for the characters of B tier is Luke Skywalker, and this one's going to be controversial for some, but I don't think Luke Skywalker is actually that good. His points to HP ratio is the best in the set. 12 points for 12 hit points is very good. Obviously, you see Grievous, he's 13 for 15 points. Because once you start getting that 13 range or whatever, it starts to seem like they jump up 2 points in value or so, or something like that, right? The old Vader was 16 points for 13 hit points. So obviously the power creep is noticeable there, especially with, you know, when you look at a character like Luke and in this new set. Now, his die flexibility, because of his ability, is great. He becomes immune to a lot of the die removal in this block that's targeted to damage dice, some things like not easy picking so much, but into the garbage chute, hasty exit, things like that. So that's pretty awesome right off the bat, okay? But then there's some not so good stuff, okay? Pacifist Luke, he can't guard damage with his own dice. He can't close quarters assault with his own dice. He can't synchronicity with his own dice. Now, does he need to be that complete package? No, I don't think so. And alongside his rod, which cannot be lightsaber pulled, by the way, I think that all those problems get fixed. But there are other good 2-cost upgrades that help his problems go away. You know, Ancient Lightsaber, even Ezra's Lightsaber, Shoto Lightsaber. So I think he's good. And I think he's going to see play early on, but I don't think he's going to be dominating the scene that the way Yoda or Snoke will in the coming months. Because I just don't think that die and that ability, especially that power action, are good enough to keep Luke in the runnings in a super duper competitive deck. Generating shields is awesome, as we've seen with things like General Regan, super cool, but ultimately, he's got to do something. He's got to push a win con of some kind, and I'm not sure where he's pushing that win con. I really don't see it. Even if you can resolve all his stuff as melee damage, I just don't know that he's better than than Ayla at Elite for the same, well, she's one more point now at 13. I just don't see it, but could I be wrong? Absolutely, because we all know I'm not right about everything. All right, so let's talk about some B tier upgrade supports and stuff like that. And the first one up is a card that I've already talked about, which is the Dark Saber, so I'm going to be brief. It's a huge 4-cost upgrade with an amazing die, and its saving grace is that it actually has redeploy. The downside is getting it out, determining what sort of role it's going to play in your deck should you decide to include it. Now, you can't rely on it, as you're probably going to see it mid to late game, but it is possible to drop it round 1. And if you can do that, then you are probably going to crush. Now, that's not going to happen in every game, and that's the problem with a 4-cost upgrade. You can't make it this sort of turning point or crux of your deck because you only get 2 copies of it. You can only put one of them in play, and it's very expensive to get out on the battlefield, all right? That said, I don't see it at the bottom of the meta, and I don't see it at the top of the meta either. I think it's a fairly middling card. But if I had to guess, it would be closer to the top than it is toward the bottom. Just not as close as some of the characters in this set. Or even some of the other upgrades, like Rex's Blaster Pistol. Now, Rex's Blaster Pistol is the first unique weapon we're running them 2 of is pretty much a given, okay? Because as long as Rex has it on him, you can play the other one out into play, which is really, really super awesome. It has a really good die. It's not a great die. Well, it might be a great die. You know, on Rex, it's definitely a great die. It pairs well with anything that Red Hero has going on for it right now in terms of aggro. So it kind of seems like an auto-include in red aggro because it can be a first turn, first round drop. I feel like that cost of 2 is just, it's really too good to pass up. But the problem with Rex's Blaster Pistol is actually its color right now. I can see red doing better as we see more out of this block, but right now I think that being red kind of makes it like the stepchild weapon. So I'm seeing it as a bit better than the Dark Saber in terms of value, but also not as good as some of the other weapons in the set or some of the weapons that we just already have out. But it being a 2-drop with that die, it's really just another E11 blaster at the end of the day, right? Which is fine because that has redeploy and this doesn't, but you can play 2 of these out, which makes it pretty good. Add some additional weapon slots for your deck, which red at this point sorely needs. Now the third and final card in the B tier here is Planetary Bombardment. And now this is a card that I'm kind of torn on because it has a high cost, but it also has an absolutely amazing die. However, when I think about the cost, I say to myself, no one's ever going to play this thing for 6, right? You're going to delve it into play or whatever the tricks that you can muster. The die, too, this is the scariest thing we've seen in a really, really long time. 7 indirect or even 6 indirect for just 1 resource, that is simply no joke when you're considering how you can get this thing out at the cost of 3 resources and dealing yourself an indirect damage with Delve. It's just insane, okay? Now, there's simply no way that this support doesn't see play in an Afro deck who's only getting better every time a new set comes out, with new stuff being added to the set. And I think this card will easily be higher tier if it breaks out into the mid-meta, into something really, really good, something that's so hard to deal with, a dice flood deck, something that we've seen before, but this card is actually going to improve. And when we find that deck in Villain, that's the challenge, I think. In Villain, this is going to be frightening. But right now, I have a feeling that it's going to be kind of like a flare. It's getting shot up into the air. It's a bright spot for a little bit, and it might peter out in a short order as people learn to sort of manage this particular die. But if we can't figure out how to do that in the long run, then this card is going to be scary. Next up, we've got A-tier cards, and I'm defining those as cards that will absolutely see some form of competitive play, definitely early in the meta, and quite possibly late in the meta as well, depending on how the shifts in that meta determine how best we can play around those cards. But they all remain individually strong for what they do and will always have some form of fear associated with them as far as sitting across the table from them. And the first one up, now I'm trying not to let my mill fanaticism impact my judgment here, but it's really hard not to for a couple of reasons, because Leia is a character that is capable of running the mill game all by herself. She can hit the deck, and she can hit the hand, assuming both of her dice don't get mitigated. Now, that's likely an impossibility. But she's red, and hit and run is still a thing if you remember way back to the Awakening set. And hit and run plus commando raid is also now a thing. You should be very afraid of giving Leia decks the initiative. Claiming against them, I think, is going to be very, very important. And I can foresee a lot of these cards running a lot of these decks with Leia that are fast, using Yoda, force speeds, things like that. You can see a lot of them running docking bays instead of a mill battlefield to recur honor guards and suppressive fire as well. Red Hero is very, very strong in the removal category now. And with Leia hitting your hand hard, she's going to be limiting the die cards you put on the table with some luck, and definitely your chance at rolls with absolute certainty. Now, the downside is partnering her with Yoda, which means you're going to be eating her other die side as well most of the time, right? Unless you can get Yoda onto that 2 focus. And it remains to be seen if running her with something like Cassian is going to be better, but then you're going to lack what blue brings. But if yellow removal can make up for that, then we might have a winning pair. I don't think they're going to be run side by side. I feel like the Leia mill and the Cassian mill, despite them doing very similar things as mill decks, I think they kind of have a different MO on how they get there. But what you should be doing is you should be watching out for Leia, because she is going to surprise the hell out of you in this meta. I have a very, very good feeling about that. Cassian, who I've just mentioned, is another great character in this set. He's one of those 2-for-1 guys, okay? He can resolve a die, and then he gets to choose an additional effect where he can either deal an indirect damage or he can discard the top of a deck. And I think Cassian is easily A tier just for those reasons. However, at Elite, he is very, very good. And he's in yellow, so I don't need to tell you what that brings for heroes. With in a deck with Leia, he can be pretty good. He can go full mill mono yellow with a partisan pairing. He can be a consistent force with Yoda and maybe a profitable connections thing perhaps. It remains to be seen what the best team is for him, but I see him in more of a mill niche than anything else. Now, at the beginning of Legacies, I said the exact same thing about Yoda, and Yoda ended up being in a lot of different decks, okay? He was in drive-by shooting. He was in some hero vehicle decks, not too many. He certainly continued the trend alongside Riken with Hero Mill, but there were so many decks that had Yoda in it because he was such a flex character. But Cassian, I don't think you want to I really don't see him just being in a damage deck. However, the fact that every one of his die sides says or indirect or discard a top card of a deck, that makes him super flexible. And 14 points puts him in so many different pairs. So I guess I should hold my tongue about it, but I think he's probably better as a mill character, and I think his hit points sort of put him in a more mill character kind of role. Now, the third A-tier character that I have up here is one you're probably expecting to see too, and it's DJ. Now, DJ is another 2-for-1 guy, except that he's a lot nastier than Cassian in that regard, at least in my opinion. Removing a die and forcing the opponent to take a damage for doing that is just brutal. And all that little indirect damage, one at a time, is going to add up in short order. Just like with Cassian, it's going to add up in short order. Multi-die removal feels like Feel Your Anger, Mind Trick, with all those cards with DJ, bring a new layer to those cards in terms of value play and importance. Now, you're really going to want to maximize that as much as possible, but getting 2 damage off of a removal card is probably pretty good if you do a Feel Your Anger for 2, or you do a Mind Trick and you just remove 2, maybe 3 dice. That's a really, really big deal. And I think it actually adds another layer to Mind Trick on top of that because of that very thing. Now, there's other multi-die removal worth looking into as well, in addition to those cards, so you'll have to explore that on your own time, but there's definitely cards that are worth talking about. And I also think he starts to pave the way for a deck that is both aggro and also brings that level of control. His points, however, probably restrict the aggro part of the formula just a little bit right now, as is the fact that he probably wants to play alongside blue, but he does work with red, right? So he's got Seven Sister, who seems like a possible team, although she kind of wants to do different things than he does. Captain Phasma can really take advantage of her special with all that extra damage piling up and going out, so maybe we'll find him in that sort of niche. He does have two range damage sides on his die, which is actually really quite good. I mean, his die is super good. I mean, it's got two range, a disrupt, a discard, and a resource. That's pretty solid for a yellow character, I think. So you should hang on to this card before you trade it away if you were thinking that, because I think his value is going to hang in there for a little while. I could see him sort of settling in the $12 to $15 legendary range, something really good mid-tier there. But once we start to see decks that evolve with him, be very afraid, because that little extra damage is going to be super duper annoying. Next up, let's talk about some A-tier non-character cards. And I want to preface this by saying that, the reason that the Padawan in Awakening still sees play today is because it has a text that is future-proof. And anytime new weapons get added to the game, the Padawan has a chance to get better. Aphra from Legacies is the same sort of character, because as more droids are added, she gets better. And this droid is absolutely insane, okay? Again, this is another amazing delve target here. Although it's not as shiny as Planetary Bombardment is, since this one only costs 4 and that one costs 6. But the die is so friggin' good. It has no blanks. 4 damage sides, only one of which is a pay side. And the other 2 sides are 2 disrupt and a shield. So it's got 2 range, 3 range for a buck, 2 indirect, 3 indirect, 2 disrupt, and 1 shield, okay? Now, I don't see what's bad about this card at all. The cost is actually worthwhile, and it can be reduced by 3 with Aphra's ability to play the first droid, the reprogram event from the set, and Weapons Factory Alpha if you control the battlefield, allowing this to hit the table for just 1 resource in round 1, and you still have a resource left over. It's just so crazy to think about how much synergy you can bring with this card too. It might even be better than A tier in a strong Aphra deck. I'm not sure. I just feel like generalizing on it, it's probably A tier only because it belongs just in this deck that is built sort of to support it, right? It also gives all droids haste, which means it essentially means you can activate them after you play them. And every time you play a vehicle, it deals an indirect damage to an opponent. So it just has all this stuff just wrapped into this card with no blanks. Totally crazy. Excellent legendary. You totally want to have 2 of these if you're playing an Aphra deck, for sure. Next card up, Ezra's Lightsaber. And this card is actually quite good. Not only does it have the usual 50% damage sides that we're used to seeing on lightsabers these days, but it costs only 2, and it has redeploy, right? And that's the thing that we've been sacrificing on a lot of these 2-cost lightsabers, right? Ancient didn't have that because it had an action to heal. Shoto didn't have that because it allowed you to snag a shield or take a shield. And redeploy is what would have put those cards over the top. But here we have a legendary lightsaber that does have redeploy and is now pretty much over the top. The range, the sides in his die are 1 range, 2 melee, 1 shield, 1 resource, a special which says deal 2 damage to an opponent's character. If this upgrade is on Ezra Bridger, force that opponent to lose 1 resource. So it's got a little bit of that roguish Ezra that we're bringing back into the block from way back in Empire at War. And that range side actually opens up some force misdirection plays if that's a thing that you like. So this one's going to be a money card for a good long while, as lightsabers tend to be lately. And it's a good thing that the die is so good, because the artwork here, it's mediocre at best. But this is going to be a card that's going to see some play in hero decks. I see it probably as a one-of, at the very least, just to get weapons out cheaper. With Ayla going up in points and not having profitable connections, this is another lightsaber that runs at the 2 slot that deck probably likes. But again, a lot of other decks will definitely like this card as well. The 6th and final card in the A tier here is the 5th Brothers Lightsaber. And the die sides on this thing are +1 melee, +2 melee, +3 melee, 1 shield, +1 resource. While this upgrade is on 5th Brother, you can resolve this die showing a modifier as if it were not showing a modifier. After you resolve this die, you may deal 1 damage to a character. Okay, so I feel like I might be rating this one too high, but after weighing the pros and cons on it, I do think that it belongs in this tier. Now, if Maul's Saber is to be feared, then this card, at the very least, is to be respected. I know that it's all modified sides, even the resource for the most part, but I don't think that's going to matter too much, right? On 5th Brother, it's better than Maul's, And in everyone else, I think it's just a really great weapon at a 3-drop. And that's important. It is a 3-drop, and every time you resolve that die, it just does an additional damage just for no reason. And you get to choose which character takes that damage, right? So I think that's pretty amazing. And compared to some other lightsabers a villain has, this one is firmly near the top in terms of utility and power, and it's going to see play whether you like it or not, because it is a great, great card. Now, the last 2 cards in this video are pretty much the 2 cards you would likely expect if you've got a pulse. And the first one up is Snoke. Snoke is an absolute beast of a card, and at 11/13, he is going to have so many teams available to him. His power action lets him generate extra resources, deal additional damage, discard more cards from you, disrupt you in a huge way, because it reads, deal 1 damage to another one of your characters to resolve one of its character dice, increasing the value by 2. So his flexibility here is just insane, and that's not even to consider his die, which is 2 indirect damage, okay, 1 focus, 2 focus, 1 disrupt, 1 resource, and a blank with 11 hit points. So, you know, right away, that flexibility again, it's insane. He's the force-wielding engine that could, bringing blue into a deck where you're going to need it for just 13 points at Elite if you really want him to be there. And I feel like his best pairing, it might just be Kylo too, but we could see him in a 3-wide control discard deck. I think him with FN2199 seems okay. I've heard tell of such control decks being tested and stuff like that. Having messed around with some deck lists myself, I think it's going to be fun and really, really annoying to just be like, hey, I discard 3 cards from you right now. The other issue Snoke brings to many of the decks is going to be part of his targeting issues. Do you kill Snoke first? Do you kill the partner first? What happens when they deal damage to a character and they use it to resolve a 1 shield into 3 shields for Snoke? These are questions that are going to need answering for sure, because of that flexibility is going to keep you on your toes. A really good player is going to know how to maximize Snoke's power action every round, and that it's frightening. It's a frightening power action. 1 damage for +2 on a die is super crazy, right? But you're also going to see it coming. So you're going to have to learn to be proactive in removing the die that you don't want Snoke to ping higher, right? As far as value cards, I think it's already been recognized that he's going to be big money and big value on the table. So hold on to your Snokes and wait for the market to settle a little bit before you decide to offload him really cheap, because you could snag a lot of cards by swapping Snoke for some other stuff, right? Now, last but certainly not least, the Dagger of Mortis is probably the best card in the set alongside Snoke. I think it's really difficult to say which one's better, but the Dagger is neutral, so you can play it in a heck of a lot of decks. And I don't think anyone's surprised that the best card in the set is blue, because the best card in a lot of these sets has generally been blue. And also, let's just take a look at this Dagger for a second and think about why it is the best card, okay? It's 3 cost, blue, upgrade weapon, neutral. 2 melee, +3 melee, 1 shield, 1 dagger, or 1 resource, sorry. Crazy. Okay, it's crazy, and it's got redeploy. And the text on it reads, before you resolve this die showing melee damage, you may move 1 shield from a blue character to attached character, okay? So, let's break this all down, all right? It can create a 2-point swing against targets with shields, if they're blue. I think it's also crazy that this thing costs 3, has that die, has redeploy, and has that ability all in one. Plus, it's not blue character only. Are you kidding me? That is like insane for an upgrade. So this card just replaced whatever we thought was the least best lightsaber or weapon in just about every deck that runs blue and uses weapons. So I can easily see this card hitting $40, maybe $50 at the end of this set, and basically staying there, just like Ancient Lightsaber. Because Dagger of Mortis is broke as heck. And if you want to play Blue Hero competitively right now, well, you better be ready to pony up some cash or get really lucky as heck, because holy crap. This is an incredibly good card. Alright, folks, those are my thoughts on the legendaries of the Way of the Force set. And I admitted that, I'm kind of split on a few of them, but for the most part, I'm pretty confident in my assessment of these cards, at least in the initial meta and having played with a few of them myself. And I do think that the Way the Force meta is going to shake things up big time. I particularly like how it made the trilogy format very, very powerful. And the addition of these cards and a few solid rares may draw a few players into trilogy format that maybe weren't looking at it before, because now it's a much bigger card pool. We've got another 160 cards in trilogy that are making that format kind of seem like a thing now, okay? And I know personally, as someone who actually does enjoy trilogy now, that I'm definitely excited to see what that shapes up to be. Well, I hope that you've enjoyed this one, ladies and gentlemen. I've got a few things to take care of in real life before game tonight. So until we meet again, may the Force be with you.